Before we reinitiate our sessions, a brief thank you message to Google News Initiative, our partner and sponsor for making the summits possible. Up next, I am delighted to welcome to the summit stage Nina Goswami, the BBC's creative diversity lead for the 50-50 Equality Projects and News. Nina will explain to us how the 50-50 project uses data to increase women's representation in various forms of content and look at the positive impact this has had for BBC audiences. Nina, we're happy to have you today and looking forward to your presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really pleased to be able to share what we've been up to at the 50-50 project. But just first, a little bit about me, just to add to what Vera was just saying. I do have a journalism background, born and brought up almost in newsrooms, from print journalism at the Sunday Times, Sunday Telegraph, until a decade or so ago. I can't believe it's that long, to be joining the BBC and working on the TV side of our content. But enough about that. The reason I'm here is to talk about how we use the 50-50 project to put, audiences at the heart of what we do. So now I'm going to turn to my trusty slides and see if I can get these to work. So essentially, what the 50-50 project is all about is about increasing women's representation on our content. At the end of the day, the business case for me is fairly obvious. 50% of the world is made up of women. So the voices that we hear should be that too. And I suppose the really obvious business case for doing this, apart from, we want to be doing it for all audiences, is that if we're not reflecting women on our content, then we're essentially losing half our customer base as news content providers. So how did it all start, our story? Back in December 2016, the presenter of Outside Source, Ros Atkins, Outside Source goes out on BBC World TV News. He was taking a car journey for a couple of hours to a bit of the UK, and he was listening to one of our radio stations, and he didn't hear a single female voice for a very long time. And he just thought to himself, in this day and age, when the BBC is saying that, we are trying to get more women's voices on air, how can that be? And so he spent that kind of Christmas period thinking about what could he do, and he decided that he would try and make a difference with his team. And so he used some really simple core principles that we still stick to today at the 50-50 project. It's about making sure that we're using data to monitor our content, and that we're using that data in a way that it will affect change, that we only monitor what we can control. And that, of course, we never compromise on quality. Editorial is the most important thing, because we need to be ensuring that our news is, of course, of the highest quality. So how does that work in real life, in principle? Well, if you take a news product, we've got very many different components that make up what we're doing. And this is where that control element comes in. So we remove what we say the team themselves can't control. So for the BBC, we don't necessarily have control over who our news presenters are. That's decided by our bosses. And we also do not control the players, as we call them. And the players for us are kind of central characters to a piece that we must report on. So, for example, the British Prime Minister is currently Boris Johnson. So we wouldn't count him in our count at the moment, but we didn't count Theresa May either when she was Prime Minister. So we take those central characters out, but everyone else that we as a team control, so that would be the political commentators, the case studies of real people who we want to explain the story, they will count to our total. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to reach 50% women over a set period of time. So if it's a daily program, we're asking our teams to count the number of men and number of women on that show, and then over a month reach 50%. So essentially they're using that data on an extremely regular basis. At the end of each program, they'll look at how that program looked and think, right, okay, what do we need to do perhaps to see how we reach that 50%? You know, at 2 weeks, we could have reached, let's say, 70% men, 30% women. How do we then bring that balance to the particular kind of feel of our news program? Because obviously we know that the news ebbs and flows. So who the best contributors are will change as we go along. So what happened with Outside Source is that over a few months, they proved that they can move from under 40% women's representation to 50%. And when they proved that, other programs started to hear about it. And through word of mouth, our journalists started to take up the 50-50 monitoring just because they wanted to, because they had a passion to see how they could improve the representation on their programs. So word of mouth, it's starting to snowball, and this is in 2017. What happened next is that around 80 teams had joined, and the then Director General of the BBC, Tony Hall, heard about the project, and he set a challenge. He set a challenge to the rest of the BBC to see how many could join the 50-50 project and how many could reach 50% women's representation in April of the following year. And this is how it ended up looking. We have 500 teams. So from 80 to 500 in less than a year joined up to 50-50. And this is what happened in the month of April. 57% of our teams reached 50% women in the month of April. And that first month that you see there, that is their benchmarking month. So what we do is we ask in the first month that they just monitor their content, see what it looks like, so that they understand where they're starting from and how they can improve on it. So from 26% to 57%. And that was in 2019. Tony Hall then set the second challenge, and that was for the month of March in 2020. Of course, we all know what happened in March this year. The world went into lockdown as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. So we wondered whether it was going to be possible to see an improvement in terms of our figures. And we were amazed to see that the teams that were still on air, of course, we went to critical services at this point, were able to continue moving that dial, that they still managed to improve women's representation during that month. So 2/3 of the teams that were on air reached 50% women. So that was a 9 percentage point increase on the previous year. So that's really exciting for us to see that, you know, it felt like there's a real mindset change happening within the BBC, that there's culture change happening, that the fact that these editorial considerations are being made on a day-to-day basis is really having an impact. And one of the things that really stands out for me is this. You'll see that every 6 months, the teams that are taking part, you can see that they are incrementally increasing the numbers who are reaching 50% women. And so that to me shows that the longer you're monitoring your content, the more that you're using it within your editorial decision making, the more likely you are to reach 50% women. So it's fantastic to see what's happening there. And well, we're about to launch the next one. So let's see what happens in March 2021. So we're talking about audiences first. And of course, we have to check with the audiences whether what we're doing actually is having an impact or not. And here you can see 3 stats that I pulled out for our impact report, which is a survey of just over 2,000 BBC online users. You can see overall 39% have noticed a shift towards more women on our content. That 16 to 34-year-olds, 40% are enjoying the content more. And for us at the BBC, that's an important group, because we are interested in seeing how we can ensure that we're servicing that group better. And then 32%, and I love this figure, of women aged 25 to 34 are consuming more of our content. And there's the business case for you. Putting audiences first through ensuring that we're reflecting them on our content means that we are getting more consumers. And I think that's a real kind of interesting thing for us to all kind of take away, because we're bringing new stories, we're bringing new diversity of thought to our content, which obviously engages people, and that's fantastic to see. So looking to where we're going next with 50-50, I alluded to the fact that we will be continuing on with the 50-50 Challenge Month, which is always from now on going to be in the month of March. We're also looking for more partners to come on board and start using the 50/50 methodology within their own organisations. We're doing that also with journalism schools and also with those outside of the media. 50/50 can be applied essentially to anything where there is a form of communication. And the reason that we're interested in getting more people to use the 50/50 methodology is that we feel that the more of us who are trying to increase women's representation, the more likely our content on the media is going to be reflective of society. If you as a corporate organization are putting up 2 options of spokespeople, then we have the opportunity of making our content reflect society better. And then the final thing that we're doing is that we are about to launch 50/50 for ethnicity and disability representation as well. Over the last few months, our teams have been busy looking at how we can adapt and tailor the model that we've been using for gender for other areas of representation. And I'm pleased to say that we've found hopefully a sweet spot, which we'll be revealing later this month. So I mentioned about other partners taking part in 50/50. We're now working with 72 partners in 22 countries across public service broadcasters, as well as newspapers like the FT. We have corporates on board like Unilever using 50/50 within their communications. So as I mentioned earlier, these are the different types of teams and partners that are joining us. What we do is that we ask them to kind of follow the model that we use at the BBC. Start small, just one team, see if they can make it work, and then see if that can be grown across other parts of the business. And what's been really great working in different sectors is that everyone brings a different voice and thought to how we can continue to make 50/50 have real momentum and really impact our content to make sure that our audiences are getting what they need. So a quick punt for our website, of course. So if you want to find out any more, you can at 5050.com bbc.com/50/50. And there's loads of information. Our last 2 reports are on there, as well as who the other partners are that are getting involved. We also have information about the 50/50 contact database under New Voices, and that's been a really important tool to help support our content makers in finding new contributors. So that's got more than 1,500 women on there at the moment, and now we're looking to obviously expand that to find new voices across the board. So here's my details. If you want to get in touch with me or the team afterwards, please do. But I have 15 minutes now to take any questions.
Yes, Nina, hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's been a great summit so far, by the way.
Thank you so much. Glad you like it. We have here some questions, and we will start with this one from Monkey Go Lightly. Could you explain, please, why the number of teams participating has dropped?
So the number of teams participating dropped because of coronavirus, and we are no longer having as many services as we had before. So we're at what we call critical services. So this is to ensure that the news is going out and so on. Also, different teams are on at different times of the year. So some of them don't fall within the March challenge month. So obviously they therefore don't end up in the report.
There is another question from Lisa Jones. Oh, do you have that split according to seniority?
Because this is content, it's a kind of a flat playing field. So what we're counting is just literally the number of men and number of women on content. So it doesn't have a kind of a layer to it. It's not about our workforce, it's about the content itself. So it's what the audience sees, hears and reads.
Thank you. Another question more from Mantre. Have they adapted the methodology somehow to the COVID-19 coverage?
Yeah, I mean, what's been really interesting, a really good question actually, is through COVID, we thought that we would see a big drop in women representation on our content. And over the summer period, and actually since COVID started, we'd seen actually an interesting trajectory in the other direction, and seeing more women on our content up to the end of August. So one of the things that we did do really quickly and early on during COVID was put a call out for content makers to share more of their contributor and experts that they can with the rest of the BBC. And that's been really important to ensure the figures are continuing to stay on par with where we were before. But in terms of the actual monitoring itself, no, nothing has changed. The same system is in place. But what's been interesting is that because we've removed the barrier of having to go into a studio, we've removed the barrier of having to have an ISDN line when you're talking on radio, all of a sudden a new wealth of opportunity in terms of women experts and contributors has opened up, because they can do it around their daily lives. And that's brilliant. So being able to do this, for example, is something that we now do regularly on all of our outlets, and that's really made the difference.
Thank you, Nina. We have here a question from Jacob Kranger. Jacob says, thinking about increasing women representation in staff, do you do anything specific to gear job descriptions towards encouraging women to apply, or to not deter them from applying?
Yeah, so this is away from obviously the 50-50 project, and this is kind of looking more at the BBC as a whole. So what we try and do in our job descriptions is make it gender neutral. So removing that out of the equation definitely helps to ensure that it's a more open level playing field. There are other things that we do internally to ensure that actually when you get to the actual interview stage, that we have what we call interview champions. So we have someone who's outside of the department sitting in and is an independent voice on the panel itself, to ensure that there's neutrality in terms of how we're doing the interviews, to make sure that everyone can be the best that they can be. And so it's not necessarily about kind of tailoring it for women, but it's more making it neutral so that everyone has an equal opportunity.
So we have time for another question. This question is from MFS. So what are some of the challenges you have faced when implementing the 50-50 program? Have there been any pushbacks?
Yeah, good question. Yes, of course. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that Ros, when he first started 50-50, was thinking about is literally, you know, what are the pitfalls? Where is it going to go wrong? What are the things that people will say is the reason why we can't do this? Because as I said at the beginning, you know, there was never a kind of a want of trying to get more women on our content, but it was more no one really knew how to do it. No one wanted to impact the editorial that we had. And so what we had to do was come up with something that was really simplistic, you know, something that would fit into the workflow that we already have. So, for example, a lot of gender monitoring is quite labor intensive. You know, it's how many minutes was someone on TV, or, you know, how many times did they appear? Every time someone appears on our programs, they count as one, and that's it. So we simplified the actual monitoring itself, so that it you know, if you're a half-hour program, it takes literally 2 minutes to look down your running order and work out who's been on your program. So that was one real pushback, is, you know, we just don't have time to do this. We proved that you do have time to do this, because we simplified it as much as we can. And then the other one that we always get, and we still do, it was very much prevalent at the beginning, but even now, when some teams join, we get the question of, we always put the best contributor on air. And I would say to them, how do you know? And I say, well, because we use them all the time. I'm like, well, does that mean that they're the best? Well, they're there because we think they're the best. And then I would say, how do you know? And they'll say to me, what do you mean, how do you know? I said, well, have you looked outside of the people that you already use? Have you seen what else is out there? I call it journalism 101. You want the best, you need to look for it, and you need to go and do your investigations. So that was always a pushback. But then all of a sudden you get this kind of moment when people go, oh, right, actually, yeah, you're right. I haven't had a little search around to see who the latest experts are in this field. Perhaps that's something I should do. And then all of a sudden you're changing the culture. And that has been really interesting to see.
Okay, thank you. Really interesting, Nina. We have another question from Jo from SRK in Switzerland. She asked, some of our journalists wonder what they can do about fewer women working in top positions in finance and science, for example. It is supposed to change how many women feature in reporting in those fields.
Yeah, I mean, that finance and science were the two kind of main target areas when we first started looking at the 50/50 contributor database. So what we did internally was we held what we called a contact hack. So we put a call out to all our staff saying, you know, we're looking for women in specific areas, and science and finance, obviously, we put quite high up on the list. And what was brilliant is that there's an actual database called Women in Science, which has got 5,000 women scientists on it, which I had no idea about. You know, there are actual public sort of resources out there that perhaps we just don't know about because we haven't kind of come across them. So that's been really good. But a lot of it has been about kind of our content makers supporting each other to find those new voices. That's been really important. On science, one of the things that's been really interesting is what our science and factual team started doing is that when you look at a research paper, the lead author tends to be a man, but many of the co-authors will be women. And when you think about it, when it comes to actually who's doing the science, it's those co-authors who are often doing the science. So what our science team started doing was they started just asking the second authors to come on to their content instead. And that's really opened up a new wealth of expertise that they hadn't seen before. So that's been fantastic. On the business front, what we did pre-COVID was that we held several what we called open days. So we got business women experts to come into BBC studios and kind of experience the kind of the atmosphere and the environment and meet some of us, realize we're not scary people. That, you know, the reason they're coming on our content is because they're the expert. We're not trying to trip them up. And actually, thinking on a more kind of general scale, not just specifically to science and finance, that's one of the things that we find across the board. It's a confidence thing, that women are very keen just to stick very closely to the subject subject area that they know. And so one of the things that we explain to them at these kind of open days, and now even our journalists do when they're kind of briefing our experts, is that, you know, reminding them, you're the expert. If you don't want to answer something, tell us now. We want you to be the best that you can be when you're on our content. And I think that's a real change for us as well, because we're understanding that, you know, you need to make your expert feel comfortable if they're going to be on your content, and then as a result they will stay and continue to do that for us.
We have another question from Roman. Any specific content that worked out especially good during the pandemic?
Healthcare has been one of the biggest growth areas in terms of women representation. I think one of the things that, you know, we have noticed in the UK context is, you know, our carers are women, and they are the experts in their field. And so that means that as a result of the change and the shift of the stories that we're doing, we're seeing an increase in women's representation. I also mentioned, obviously, the removal of the barrier of having to go into a studio has really had an impact. But the choice of story that we're doing has changed, hasn't it? So, I mean, I think that's what's really had an impact as well. So when you're looking at education, for example, which has been a really big story in the UK for the last few months, There has been more women head teachers, more women teachers, and also when we're talking to the parents, that has actually, interestingly, when we've been talking to parents, we've been quite balanced, actually. It's been a bit more 50-50. But, you know, we're talking in subject areas which lend themselves more naturally to women to be able to comment on, which is, you know, I suppose still a strange state of affairs, because in my head, you know, women should be championing every sector. But, you know, that's where we are culturally, I suppose. And I think kind of going back to the science finance question, and which ties into this, is that we as the media have a real role to play in this, because how, you know, education looks, how health looks, is as a result of what we're putting out there and what we're portraying. So if we're not role modeling women in higher leadership roles, then we're not going to see that kind of moving and filtering up through society as well. So I think, again, that's a real crucial point to both those questions.
Yeah, great answers, Nina. We have time for a last question. It's from BC Anderson. BC says, great initiative. How can a university teaching journalist become a partner? So that's a great question indeed.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. Brilliant. Yeah, so what we do with our journalism university college counterparts is that there's two different ways. Obviously, you can get your students in their essays themselves to monitor who they're quoting and make sure that it's 50-50. Or what quite a lot of them do is through their news days. So when they're creating a publication or they're doing a day of TV output, then they're looking at their students monitoring their content to reach 50% women. So we've got lots of different tools to help support that. So, you know, if people are interested in joining the project, please do, you know, get in touch. Angela Henschel is our external partners manager, and she and I, one of us, or someone else from the team will, you know, chat through kind of how we can, you know, tailor 50-50 so that it works for your particular content. And the reason we decided, or, you know, started thinking about universities specifically as well, is because we want to make sure that diversity is at the heart of those who are joining our industry. And I think that was really crucial for us, that, you know, they're already thinking before they're even part of the media industry, how they can ensure diversity of thought, how they can make sure that their content is reflective of society, and, you know, how they can find different stories, because the more voices you're listening to, the different opinions you're getting, the more likely you are to find different news stories. And I just I've got time, haven't I, for a quick anecdote, hopefully.
You have.
Good. It's my favorite one, and I know I probably overuse it, but I don't care. BBC Viet, one of our World Service language news services, they massively increased their women's representation, to the point where one of the bosses had said to them, you know, it's great that you're already enthusiastic about 50-50, but let's see if we can pipe it down. After all, it is called 50-50. But the reason I asked the Viet team, why all of a sudden had you gone up to 80% women representation on your content? And they just explained, there's just brilliant stories out there that we didn't know about. And that's the difference, because they hadn't been talking to that particular audience before. They didn't know that those stories existed. And the result of Viet increasing their women's representation was that when World Service Languages put out for apprentices to join their particular service, they had one woman had got in touch saying that the reason that she was applying was because she'd seen an increase in women's representation on the service, and then found out about the 50-50 project. So that's the power of increasing women's representation on our content. And I don't know, it makes me really excited every time I think about it.
Of course. So thank you, Nina. Thank you for this great presentation. People love it. So as we did. So hope to see you soon, and keep in touch.
Thank you, Nina, for being with us today and for your insightful talk.